How did you become so good at playing video games?
We play it safe because we are afraid of it, and the feeling is blocked off. It's a losing game, you're already dead without passion. Video games are more than simply a way to pass the time. They are also an emotion that relaxes us while also motivating and inspiring us. Welcome back everyone, we're here today with a new video on 10 video games that aged horribly. Number 10, GoldenEye 007. GoldenEye is the game that most benefits from nostalgia. It's often regarded as the best shooter ever created. However, as soon as you plug in an N64 and start playing, you'll realize the truth. GoldenEye's aim is an aggregate disaster. Invisible attackers snipe at you from all across the map as you try to discern a bad man from the landscape. The game was fun at the time, but it has one of the largest realities versus memory gaps in gaming history. Number 9, Tomb Raider. The most affected by the passage of time were games that attempted to create realistic graphics. Lara Croft's nudely pixelated arms serve as a reminder of how far graphics have progressed, while Mario and Donkey Kong get away with it. The battle, above all, is unsatisfactory. Your weapon will lock on to an opponent in the area if you point it at them. Simply keep the shoot button pressed until everything dies. When you add in bad camera transitions, no analog stick support, and inconsistent prompt recognition, you have another game that has vanished. Number 8, Star Fox. Star Fox was a well-received game that was one of Nintendo's first 3D home console games to use polygon. The original Star Fox received a considerable notice when it was first released on the SNES, and it isn't a bad game in general. The true reason it hasn't aged well is because of the sequel, Star Fox 64. The pixelated mess had vanished even after the upgrade, replaced by fluid controls and movement that is still delightful to this day. Number 7, Final Fantasy VII. This one is going to hurt some people's feelings, but it's not number 1. Final Fantasy VII is regarded by many Final Fantasy fans as one of the series' best games. The game's characters are a little cliched and the battle mechanisms are lacking. These issues were resolved in later Final Fantasy games, but Final Fantasy VII does not hold up as well as some of the other games in the series. Number 6, Resident Evil. Many people remember Resident Evil giving them a true shock back when it first came out. If you play it right now, however, you could find yourself chuckling more than scared. While the fixed camera angles can provide some jump scares, the controls are awkward and inconvenient. Just don't go back to the first game because you'll be dissatisfied. Number 5, Call of Duty Finest Hour. Although Call of Duty Finest Hour was not the most popular game at the time, it received a lot of positive feedback when it was released. It was one of the last hurrahs for World War II video games in the early 2000s. The graphics were bad when the game was initially released, and they're even worse now. Every few missions, the character changed, and it was difficult to form attachments to any of them. Number 4, Silent Hill. Silent Hill 2 is still a great horror game, but it's no longer worth playing. Silent Hill was published as a more serious follow-up of the Resident Evil franchise, which had debuted 3 years prior. By today's standards, Silent Hill has poor aesthetics, but it isn't the only factor that causes a game to age horribly. Combat is clumsy and imprecise, thus it's mostly avoided. It can be difficult to move around, and if you're fleeing from a beast, it can be fatal. Number 3, Metroid. Metroid was a big game design innovation with many talents to unlock and a wide area to explore. Yet, certain design choices are unpleasant in retrospect. At the time, the game was ambitious, but it was limited by certain quality of life flaws that made it difficult for players to enjoy. Players must input a 24-character password every time they spawn because there is no internal saving. Number 2, Mortal Kombat. The hyper-violent deaths are the most well-known feature of this battle series, but pulling one off in the first entry was more frustrating than enjoyable. The controls are cumbersome and clunky, and the battle system that leads up to these horrific endings is far too simple. It's also worth noting that the game's digitized sprites weren't particularly impressive when it was first released. Number 1, Grand Theft Auto 3. You may recall playing Grand Theft Auto 3 for hundreds of hours when it initially came out. Players felt much more invested in the destruction they were wreaking because it was the first GTA game to switch away from the top-down perspective. The best map in the game is a little one that simply shows the immediate surroundings. It's wise to let Grand Theft Auto 3 alone if it holds a special place in your heart. Do like and subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and please share so that you can relive your childhood memories.